Hello.
Okay, it's just loading.
Okay. This streaming is now live on Facebook.
All right. Good morning, everybody. We are with a very good friend of mine today, longtime friends, Segun Olude. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you.
We are we're live this week, actually Friday, and then we're going to go into next week with a really important topic that we want to talk about. And in our context at Candy Event Consulting, everything is about events. We live and breathe events. We talk events, and we train people how to run events. But sometimes we don't see what we don't see. And in my world, we really try to make opportunities for people to have a voice. We try to do a lot of learning in the work that we do. But what a gift for you to be here with us today. I would love to share a little story if I could. But before we do that, would you like to say hi to everybody and introduce yourself? You've got so many projects on the go and lots of history and water under the bridge for us. I think it was what, 2008 when I started my company. You were the go-to person to do the branding for Candy Event Consulting, and it still stands and is a beautiful example of how you are able to see people for who they are and then apply that to a design concept and to a project. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It's indeed a pleasure to be here. It's been a while, and I'm always very thankful for our, being able to keep in touch over the years and do projects from time to time. It's been very rewarding for me as a person. I totally enjoyed working with you on Moments Magazine, and of course your branding before that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been we've had a bit of history, and
That's
also having
right.
the opportunity to write once, that was great.
That was awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about that article? Because at the time you were working on a pretty huge book project as well.
Yes, I was working on writing aspects of what makes the Yoruba culture. I'm Yoruba from Western Nigeria, West Africa, and I had got to the point where I had to record aspects of the culture, what makes up
Mhm.
the culture, because it wasn't just about the language, it was also about the food, the practices, and the words we used, and so on. So during that research phase, um, I came across information about celebrations, and I wrote a little bit about that for the magazine. And it's been expanded. Actually, the book is here on the shelf. If I can just pull one out very quickly. Um, so this is the finished product now.
Amazing. Amazing.
Over 500 and something photos of Yorubas, where they are, who they where they live, what they do, and so on and so forth. And it talks about all the culture in very brief um, how do descriptions of the culture, not extensive, in-depth research paper on every aspect, but just enough so you understand who we are. So that
Right.
was the project of that time.
So why was that one important to you? What did you
Well,
find?
after being here for so many years and assuming that I know a lot about the language and the people,
Mhm.
with the Yoruba people, I was confronted with a question during the master's project that you've told us about Jews, about Aborigines of Australia, you've told us about First Nations in Canada, you know all these places and you know all these people, but you said nothing about your own people. So can you tell us more about the Yoruba people? And I thought, that's really easy.
Almost too easy, hey, when it's in your own backyard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, I had 3 months to answer that question. So I
Mm.
started asking Yoruba people here in Canada about their heritage. And a common thread developed. that we all move over here to Canada, North America, go to different places, and we speak the local language, in this case, English, to our children, and we stop speaking the language. So essentially, in one generation, the language is lost.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a break because we speak English to them. When they grow up, they don't know the language and the language is lost. So culturally, they identify with the language they cannot speak, and they probably would eat some of the foods.
Mm-hmm.
They probably have a couple of artifacts from that culture, and that's it.
Right.
So it became a challenge for me to actually properly, academically document this culture and
Mm-hmm.
also tell the stories. So the book is both a research paper, it's a historical record, it's an academic book. It's, if you want to read it for relaxation, I've got enough stories in there.
And beautiful photos. Now, were those photos that you took yourself?
Yes, all of
Yeah,
the photos I took, but
amazing.
yeah, I think you do some things over time, you don't know why sometimes. For
Yeah.
years I've just been taking photos and taking photos and taking photos. The day I started this project, I realized, oh my goodness, there's a reason why I've been taking photos every time I travel to that part of the world,
Right.
and they all just fit into different categories.
Beautiful. And you as a designer, and I think what I love about your work is that we talked a lot about design thinking in the past, or this way of solving problems, and and not just visually, but in every aspect. You are a designer, and you are looking for solutions. And I think that's why you and I have such really rich conversations, because we're both a little bit like that. It's like, where is that piece, and how can we
Exactly.
include things into our lives or our businesses that are going to not just enhance, to take us further, because I think we're both very driven that way as well, but part of that is, how do we make the world better? How do we not just be inclusive is a big word and a bit of a buzzword, but I think being able to see things that maybe feel uncomfortable, that might feel like, we just had a conversation yesterday about how do we step into something that we really feel we need to do, but there's no way to explain it, um, but we just feel strongly that it needs to happen. And I think part of that is your design mind and heart. But when we chatted yesterday, you mentioned about, even visually, when we talk about racism in Canada, and for our world of event planning, or when we're attending events, um, visually, you also design promotional material, and brochures and magazines and all sorts of stuff for all sorts of different gatherings. But you had mentioned a couple of things about the design eye around that, and how do we start to look at diversity different visually. Could you share maybe with the people that are listening today what that looks like for you, and how you, I believe that you also have to have a trained eye, right? Like, know what to look for. So what would be some of those things that you look for?
Yeah, I think if I miss anything, I would like the listeners and those watching to ask questions, because
Of course.
sometimes I assume everybody knows what I know. I came by this, through different routes. Number one, as a designer, I'm trained to look at a mess and try to make sense out of it,
Mhm.
visually speaking. Someone who writes might take a whole bunch of words and statements and everything and make sense of it so that we can read an article or a press statement and so on. So I come from the design background and look at what is the problem, if there's one, and if there's no problem, what are the opportunities?
Mm.
There's always opportunity in something. So, how do we use that to communicate effectively? One of the things, of course, the easiest is to simplify and break things into small components so that anybody can see or understand them. So that's always a tool that's at the back of the mind. And with every lecture, there's a matrix that I would use to say, from the person who has the original idea or message to the audience, according to studies and as well written by Marita Starkman and Lisa Cartwright in their book, Practices of Looking. That space in between, you have nothing. You just have an intention. So every time I open my mouth to say something, all I have is an intention. It's kind of disheartening, but you may say something and somebody hears it very differently.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you overcome those? Well, for the purpose of just shortening the conversation, there are shortcuts that we use. If I say something like, I'm feeling blue today, I know you understand what I mean intuitively because you understand what it means to feel blue.
Mm-hmm.
That's a commonly agreed upon condensation of an idea. So if I wanted to do a shortcut in a conversation, instead of saying, "Oh, I'm feeling la 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 da la da la da la," I could say, "Oh, I'm just feeling blue today." And anyone
Mm-hmm.
who understands that concept understands it. So there's an opportunity to use that word blue as a stepping stone
Mm.
to getting an idea across. And you have to look for these opportunities every time. And you don't have to step on all the stepping stones across a stream to get across. There are times you can jump over some and make the journey quicker. So we do this visually as designers. That's what we go to school to learn, how to use design principles. How does the eye see? How does the brain interpret? What are the elements of language that we use? What are visual elements that come into play? So we use all that for communication, and it always is at the back of my mind as I'm preparing any document, any piece of work. I always have to think of who the audience is,
Mm-hmm.
what the message is, and look for how to shorten the distance or the gap between message and audience. I don't know if this is clear, the way I'm explaining it.
It's very clear. And how do you include um, when people say diversity in those visuals, when you're looking at it? So you're in that area of questioning, you're listening, you're taking in information as you can, you're finding common words or common ground, I guess, when you're speaking with somebody. How do you then make decisions around making sure, let's say with photos in some of these publications, for example, how would you make sure something like that has the diversity lens, or the idea of introducing something new, whether that's like we work a lot with words and phrases and marketing content, that kind of thing, but visually, how would you include things in the work that you do to make sure everybody is represented equally?
Thank you. I think it's important, of course. Number one is authenticity. If
Hmm.
we lose authenticity, then we've lost the communication. We can't go on a stock photo site and say, oh, this is so diverse. Let's use this. It shows one person from Europe, one person from Africa, one person from Asia, and
Mm-hmm.
we do that. That sometimes it's like a visual cliche, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to try and remember to be authentic. In some cases, it's best to find local people to use on your poster or your brochure. Find people within a company if your company is diverse enough. If it's not, then it actually points to a problem that has to be fixed from ground up
Mm-hmm.
so that you remain authentic rather than saying, oh, we want to project the image of diversity when we don't have it. And we go to a stock photo site and just take a stock photo that shows everybody of every nation and just slap it on to the
Mm-hmm.
poster.
Yeah.
In fact, one university got in trouble, I think about 15 years ago, when all this was coming to the surface. What they did was take a photo at a football game, and they saw that it was mostly Caucasian faces.
Okay.
So they took some photos from another game where they had a more diverse audience and took some other faces and photoshopped into this thing,
No.
and they
Okay.
got and they got caught because
Something
somebody's
we
like,
don't want.
"Hey, I wasn't at that football game,"
Oh my goodness. Wow.
so they had to apologize. So
Yeah.
authenticity is number one. So as a designer, I would always ask, do you have a diverse workforce? Do you have employees,
Mhm.
people associated with your company? It doesn't even have to be all employees. It could be suppliers, it could be associates. You have to look at the whole structure of the company and how they operate to say, yes, this
Mm-hmm.
is who we are.
Yeah.
So if they're planning an event, then that could play into it. But if they don't have it, there's no need to force it. That is a culture change.
Hmm.
So let's put that aside then. Let's say they have all these people and they have a very diverse workforce, and that has to be shown. Well, to give you a very good example, I'm arranging an event or I'm working for publicizing an event. When all these photos come, one of the principles of design doesn't matter whether you're white, you're black, whatever color you are, when we're talking about diversity, when you're showing groups of people as headshots or in their profile photos on an event invitation or brochure, number one principle, all head sizes must be approximately the same
Hmm.
because the human mind judges that if your photo is bigger or your head size is bigger and mine is smaller, automatically there's a class.
Right. Right.
So you want to ensure that all the photos that you're using, that the head sizes are the same. And for the designer, if somebody sends you a photo that's already cropped to about this, and another sends you a photo that has room around it, you have to ask, is there anything else that I can find so that I can adjust each frame so that every head size will be about the same?
Hmm.
So that's number
Okay.
one principle. Of course, there's also the principle where all the eye levels, if you can, should be the same. And those are things that we use as part of communicating. So anyone who's working
Yeah.
on an event should know that that's important.
Well, and like you say, and it's really interesting, I think, sometimes the idea of the easy choice being go to a stock photo, get something that includes everybody. And I've been involved in projects where we've been guilty of that as well, where you've got to get something out the door and we're moving fast and we're checking a box and we're not being um, intentional about what we're including and how are we including those photos, and you've got it out the door and you're getting things done, but in many ways unconsciously. And what I love about what you're saying about authenticity is you can't hide behind authenticity. Like you're saying, like if you don't have people to take a photo of in your company or your organization, what does that say about your organization? And we could say this in all sorts of ways with women and different diverse cultures in Canada, for sure, because we are not the melting pot necessarily. We are this beautiful, like this painting by Dean Stanton
Exactly.
behind me, where there's lots of vibrancy and there's a lot going on, but the beauty of that together is what I love to see. And if we're not intentional about that visually, um, we can get lazy, right? We can kind of allow things to just go on and go on, and then it layers on itself where it just becomes a way of doing things. And when we talk about systematic racism, things that have been happening for years and years, sometimes we don't even know where it came from, because of a decision or a series of decisions that were made that now start to affect a certain group of people, or in this case, we're talking Black Lives Matter in the next week. And the idea of, I think you mentioned this, the idea of that's a culture issue.
It is a culture
Yeah,
issue.
it's not just about a design project. This is a culture issue. And so when you talk about that, I think we chatted a little bit yesterday about when you enter a room, even as somebody of color, and you know, vibrance and you being you, what is that like for you? Because sometimes you might even come against or come into a culture that might not be it may not be aggressive against
Mm,
or outwardly.
mhm.
But what are those things that you would feel or see that maybe some of us just are not feeling and seeing in the same way?
Okay. There are multiple levels of understanding and acceptance. And I, as a person, am probably more lenient and more generous to allow people to be themselves. When I say that, I also want to be myself. So I don't want anybody's expectations on me
Yeah.
or their biases on me. And I also do not want to impose my own bias on anyone else. So when I come into a room, you see this a lot at events where you find people from one community cluster together and
Hmm.
people from another community cluster together, and there's hardly any mix. Why does that happen? It's because of comfort levels. And we have to understand that and give people the grace to, want to have a wonderful time with people that they're familiar with.
Hmm.
But I intentionally, as part of my own ethos or guides to my living, is when I get into a space like that, yes, I could cluster with my own friends and family, but I will at some point cross over to go say hello to somebody that I've not spoken with before
Hmm.
and break the ice. They also don't know how to break out of that. So by going over to the other community, and I've done this before, I'll drag one or two people with me. I say, hey, come meet my family, come meet my friends, and generally make the whole place uncomfortable for
That's
everybody until we all relax.
exactly.
So one of the ways that I would do that intentionally at an event is to introduce games into it.
Okay.
And my wife is just fantastic at that. One of the games she has is, give everybody a card and then ask them to go across and talk to somebody they've never seen before, never spoken with.
Yeah.
And at the end of it, they get to introduce that person as if they are that person.
Uh,
Very interesting icebreaker.
yeah.
So there are things that we can do during events to cause
Hmm.
people to move out of their comfort zones and explore and meet people and so on and so forth. So
Hmm.
that's just one. And then, of course, there are other levels of it too, but we wouldn't have time to go into all of it.
Well, have you ever had, and that's really a great example because those are things that we do with our candy team. We try to create those engaging opportunities and ways for people to interact differently or surprisingly, where there's something happening where now it's mixing things up, and it might be people, it might be tables, it might be conversations that are layered on top that are a little out of the box, so you're not sure where it's going. So you have a little bit of discomfort at the beginning. But have you had anyone um, kind of resist that opportunity for you to come say hello or to come meet your family or to have these conversations? And I would guess that you are a person that has traveled the world, and you are a world-class designer and an author, and you run your own um, service and humanitarian organization in Nigeria still, I think, right?
Yes, we do.
With the Promised Land. So
Yes.
you have so much to talk about. So it's amazing to me how in those situations where if we break it down to color, you miss so much. Like there's so many pieces of that. But at the same time, have you felt, because of who you are or how you approach, maybe even because of your color, that you have sensed any resistance or any of that feeling of you're not welcome?
Yes. And again, it could be because of unfamiliarity with people like myself,
Mm-hmm.
and I would explain that. Early in my transformation into Canada, because I came as an adult, I went to the Royal Ballet to, to watch something, and I realized during the intermission that I was just one of probably three people by color
Oh, is that right?
in the whole place. I'm sure it's changing, and it's changed over the years because now you have more people. But at that time, I'll be the only one in my class. I'll be the only one, in a group. So it's understandable because there were not many people. Canada was not that diverse at that time.
Mm-hmm.
But now we're more diverse, so we should be more accepting of one another and be more familiar with seeing one another.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not always like that. I remember at one of the events they hold at a very popular spot here in Winnipeg, I heard this music and I'm like, oh, I've got to go listen. I've got to go dance. Let me explain it to you. Pangara is is not from where I come from.
Okay.
I'm
What
sure
what
some
is it?
people.
What is
So,
it called?
Pangara, that's
Hangara.
a dance and a drumming and dance form
Okay.
that is, you could relate it to East India, or like somewhere around that area,
Okay.
Punjabi to be specific. So I love it. I don't know why. I just love the rhythm of the beat.
Mm-hmm.
So I heard this thing, and I'm like, oh, I can hear Pungara. So I'm going to go and listen. As soon as I got there, it's like everybody's like, what are you doing here?
Oh
And
no.
I'm dancing.
As you
So,
should.
as I should. So eventually, a couple of people are like, yeah, this guy is okay. But, we have to give one another time to
Right.
sort of adapt to different spaces. So
Absolutely.
I did have a wonderful time that day. So, and I never forgot it because,
Uh,
yes.
well, and when you kind of allow yourself to open up to other conversations, other people, maybe people that you feel like you wouldn't have anything in common with, it just completely, in my world, has opened up my eyes to so many, like you say, maybe it's not just a serious conversation about something that needs to be changed. That's one part of it for sure. But maybe there's action and opportunity and something new that can be created here. And that to me is so beautiful, where you start to play around with thoughts and music, the beats and the colors and the idea of creating a world where there's room and movement for everybody. I think that
For
that's
everybody.
where, yeah, that's to me one of the most exciting things, when I start to think about not just physically traveling, because you don't have to leave your house. And so your article was part of our Moments magazine, the planner's postcard section right at the back. And the reason why the magazine is designed that way with the planner's postcard is that the postcard can be from any perspective, any culture, if you are a part of any community in Canada, there's an opportunity for you to learn about another culture and to learn about even the practices that are brought into events and some of those really cool colors. And I think in yours you had photos of the food and the fabrics and some of those traditions around how would you invite somebody to participate in that. um, that gives us all sorts of great information if we're listening,
If we're
to
listening.
be, to be including in other things. So any last words? This is what a great opportunity to chat with you this way and to introduce you to all our friends here. Any
Thank you.
last words you'd like to add?
I'll try and make this very brief because it's an experience that we as a community have had many times when it comes to event planning. You go to a normal contemporary hotel and you say, we want to, book a hall. You book a hall and they, can you still hear me?
I can.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
They say, okay, this is what we have for menu. And you say, can we, have something from Nigeria or something from, we want something else apart from what you're offering. Oh no, this is all we offer and it's all a Western menu.
Hmm.
And eventually you end up with your event in a community hall where you can bring your own foods.
Right.
In some cases, in one specific case, they did say, okay, yeah, just send us a recipe or we'll get it off the internet and we'll make the food. And we thought, oh, this is going to be great. But that day, nobody really enjoyed it because so I believe that event planners and also hotel management and people in the
Hmm.
industry need to start looking at diversity in every aspect of the business,
Hmm.
not just, making a show of it, but changing everything.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
going to include changing the food, changing the style of decoration, basically,
Exactly.
yes, and not change completely from what you have or what you do, but include others. Maybe I should just use the word inclusive. So
Mm. I love that. And when we do, so one of the biggest things we do through Candy Event Consulting is our strategy sessions. And what a beautiful opportunity for us to, as a team, to listen to where they're coming from, but also to be including some of these ideas and and increasing the capacity, not just to run a better event or a bigger event, but a more inclusive and more diverse event. So thank you so much for being here today.
thank you so
What
much
a
for having
gift.
me. Thank
Gift
you.
to have you. I'm sure we'll chat again soon. But for the rest of you, thank you so much for being here. Just watch our Candy Event Consulting Facebook page. We are going to be talking to some other friends of mine next week. We've got people lined up all week long, including actually, and you'll appreciate this again, it's my daughters.
Oh my word, that would be
So my
wonderful.
daughters, Sharia and Journey, they're 20 and 24, and they have their own perspective of being in a mixed family. And so they have agreed to come on with me next week as well. So you'll have to watch that one. You
I
knew them when
have
they
to.
were very
I
little,
will. Yes.
a long, long time ago, but they're all grown up. But
Oh,
thank you again for being here.
thank
And
you.
for the rest of you, if you've got any chats, any comments, anything that you'd like to add to the chat box, feel free to do that. And I'm sure we'll be able to connect you with Segun too. And we will see you again next week. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we'll see you again.
Thank you.